Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see everyone's faces. And for those of you who we cannot see your face, we feel your presence and we're happy that you're here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. How was the play-in music? Was it good? Was it hype? It was like hyped up a little bit? Okay, good. That's what I wanted. I was dancing over here and I was like, I hope my camera's not on, but if it is, oh well. Well, I'm Lisa Viscusi and I'm the manager of adult learning here at the not here, well, in my house, but also at the Frick. And I'm just so glad to see all of these amazing panelists and our guest, Erin, who you will meet in a moment. Before we start, I do want to do a land acknowledgement. The Frick Pittsburgh occupies ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. As a place of history and nature, the Frick recognizes the cultural importance of land and the role of cultural institutions in the formation of collective memory. Displacement and erasure are not just histories for Native peoples. Land acknowledgements, like historic sites themselves, are exercises in preservation and reconciliation engaged with past, present, and future. So I want to mention that there will be closed captions as of now. And if they are in your way for any reason, you can hover over them with your mouse and move them around your screen. If you don't need them, you can turn them off. And also, if you have any questions, comments, if you need help with anything, you are welcome to throw anything into the chat. I will be able to see that, and my colleague Amanda Gillen, who you cannot see, is here to support us as well. And our panelists will also be able to see, but they may be focused on you and talking to you. And we are going to have a Q&A afterwards, so you can send in your questions and comments, and we'll hold on to them, and we will do our very best to get to as many as we can. But I have a feeling that this is going to be a full discussion, so which is a great thing. So I want to introduce Erin Abbott. We're thrilled to have you here, Erin. She is the Vice President of Merchandising for Offline by Aerie. She is here to say a few words. Aerie is a sponsor of sporting fashion and has been a really, really wonderful partner, and we're so grateful for your generous support. So thank you for being here with us, Erin.
So good evening, and thank you so much. I'm honestly so proud to be here this evening to kick off tonight's discussion. What an incredible group of women we have here this evening. History, fashion, and feminism, three things I'm personally passionate about, and I'm sure the majority of women on this call are men. As Lisa mentioned, I'm on the Aerie merchant team here in Pittsburgh, which is part of American Eagle Outfitters. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Aerie, it's a brand that sells bras and swim and apparel and so much more. We disrupted the fashion industry in our own way in 2014 when we stopped retouching our models, and it has really turned into a movement of self-love. We really believe in power and positivity and no retouching, and hashtag Aerie Real is, it's honestly like a mantra that it's a standard that we hold ourselves to, and it's quite literally changed everything about the way that we do business. We really focus on helping our customers feel good about themselves first, and then feel really comfortable and confident in what they're wearing. And then Offline by Aerie, we launched last year in the middle of pandemic, but it's really about bursting out and moving in activewear that's made for your real life. So it's a no pressure brand. We have leggings and sports bras and all the pieces and parts to help you and support you. So this sporting fashion exhibit that we are fortunate to have here at the Frick was quite literally, and no pun intended, the perfect fit. And we are thrilled to be one of the sponsors. So please join me in welcoming an incredible panel here tonight to discuss the intersection of fashion and feminism and how fashion is evolving to meet the needs of women. Let's get real.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was lovely, really, and just a perfect intro. And now I wish you were on the panel. Maybe we'll do it again. We'll do it again. So, well, thank you so much. I'm gonna make you disappear into the audience. But it was lovely to see your face, and thank you for being here. Okay. Oh, she's a little frozen. Well, that was lovely. What a nice tone, right? I am really, again, I'm really happy that everyone's here today alongside these amazing, amazing, amazing panelists to have what promises to be an exciting and edifying conversation. So this is our second of 3 discussions inspired by the Frick's current exhibition, Sporting Fashion, Outdoor Girls from 1800 to 1960. And it is brought to us from the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. And I do also really want to thank our partner in these 3 programs, the Women and Girls Foundation. I want to thank Heather Arnay, Natalie Bensavenga, who have been a true pleasure to work with, have opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I'm just grateful that the Frick is able to have a partner who is wholeheartedly committed to educating and empowering young girls and women in Pittsburgh and beyond. So the sporting fashion exhibition explores the evolution of women's sporting fashion, of how clothing has evolved, sometimes too slowly. And so to meet the needs of women and their increasingly daring outdoor fitness and wellness pursuits as well. So we're going to be looking at today at the complex issues that surround women's dress, women's power, and women's athleticism, both past and today. And this conversation is it's going to be extremely layered, and we will discuss it through many lenses, including intersectionality, activism, gender and gender roles, equality, equity, accessibility, and really issues that impact women's rights and all human rights. And as I'm saying this, I'm looking at each one of you, and we've had the pleasure to talk a time before this all together. And I just could have sat and listened to this, the depth of knowledge and passion that each one of you have, and who you are in the community as well, and that you're here with us. It feels like a little miracle to me every time this all comes together. So I'm very proud to be joined by our moderator and our panelists today. I'd like to welcome Jessie Ramey. Hi, Jessie. How are you? She is the founder, and everyone, please correct me if I misspeak for any reason. Founding director of the Women's Institute and associate professor of gender studies at Chatham University. Welcome, Jessie. Also, Jaime Schultz. Hi, Jaime. From her lovely, lovely pile of books. It's amazing, don't worry. She is a professor of kinesiology at Penn State, and she's the author of Qualifying Times, Points of Change in U.S. Women's Sports, which you can pick up in the gift shop or the museum shop at the Frick. I highly recommend it. Amanda, who you cannot see, read it, I think, in a day. She immediately gave me the book, but I already had it, so we like it around here. And then also Kiya Tomlin. Hi, Kiya. She is the designer and founder of Kiya Tomlin clothing line, among many other things, and has been involved, I know, with Demeatria. And how many things are you two working on in this city? They're just moving around. You'll see them tomorrow and the next day. Don't worry, that's fine. And speaking of Demeatria, she is the founder of FashionAFRICANA, and she is a curator, producer of style, culture, and design. And I have to say, Demeatria, I imagine who I would like to shepherd a discussion, and I thought of you, but even through our discussions and our talks, it's become more clear to me how meant to be this is, and you get it, you see it, and I think that everyone here does, and I'm just excited for this conversation. So I won't say any more about that, because I'm going to let you all talk, and I am here for any questions. Like I said, please, everyone, put your questions in the chat, your comments, but I'm going to let this illustrious group of ladies speak. Demeatria.
Oh, thank you so very much, Lisa. It's always a great pleasure to work with you. And I really appreciate you and the Frick for inviting me to be a part of this exciting and very important conversation. I'm excited that we have such an esteemed panel. And as Lisa mentioned, when we had our previous conversation, I mean, we could have talked all day long. I mean, it was just so interesting on so many levels. So So I'm very excited about this exhibition. I love it. I can't wait to go back again because I need more time. It's really amazing. And I shared also that it's interesting how we can use fashion and design, as a vehicle through which to learn about history, which is really, really exciting to me as well. So we would like to kick off with introductions from our amazing panel, and so that you can learn more about them and their work. And we're going to start off with the amazing Jessie Ramey. So Jessie.
Oh, thank you so much. And Lisa and team, this has just been a tremendous opportunity to come back to the Frick, but thank you for your work through COVID. You've been knocking it out of the park as all of this programming through the pandemic. So really appreciate everything you've been doing. I encourage everybody to see this exhibit. If you haven't had a chance to do so, it's really beautiful. And it's also an unusual opportunity to see some of the types of garments that we don't normally get to see. And I actually want to say a little bit more about that in a minute. As you heard, this exhibit is organized historically or chronologically, but it also has several sub-themes. So you really get a sense of change over time. And some of the pieces actually date back 200 years. It's really, really a great exhibit. I enjoyed it a lot. And I was actually struck by the parallels to the history of women's collegiate sports. And since there is such a parallel, and I work at Chatham University, I went digging through our archives and found some photos. So I thought that what I would do to just sort of frame some of my thoughts and observations about this exhibit is share a couple of pairings of photographs that I found that I thought you all might enjoy because it will sort of give us a Pittsburgh context for this exhibit. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here. We're also getting so good at this, right? Now let's make sure everybody can see these. Is everybody able to see those? Terrific. I'm pulling all my screens onto one place, just like I have to do with my students when I teach. We're all so good at this. All right. So like I said, I'm going to just put up a couple of pairings of some images and then thought I would just sort of pose some questions and some observations that I had as I was looking at this gorgeous exhibit. And then maybe we can come back to some of these questions. I think some of the other panelists will also have a lot to say about some of these questions as well. So just taking a look here, also, I absolutely love these photos from our archives. So thank you to librarians and archivists and museum personnel. They're some of my favorite people as a historian, right? Who keep these beautiful things. So just thinking about this first image of picnicking, right? Lots of obvious questions here about gender roles. You can really see how gender expectations are culturally and historically constructed. And what I mean by that is that it's not fixed in time, right? Or biologically determined if you're thinking about gender. And fashion really does help us see how gender is literally created. You can see lots of thinking about what's considered appropriate for women to do in public spaces. How much movement should they be able to make with their arms and legs? Think about what these women are wearing in these photographs. Are women and girls even allowed to have fun? What kind of fun can they have? Some interesting things to think about there. Looking at these Chatham women from the 1890s, right? 1888. So let's take a look at another image. Swimming. Oh my goodness, so many questions about, how much of the body should be exposed? What's considered sexual and actually therefore dangerous, right? When we think about what is sexuality in women's bodies. We saw plenty of controversies around this, around the sexualization of women's bodies in sports this summer, didn't we? When we were thinking about the Norwegian women's beach handball team who refused to play in bikini bottoms, while the men's team, of course, was permitted to wear loose fitting shorts. We also saw the German women's gymnastics team that was permitted, that they were wearing full body suits at the Olympics rather than leotards. I'm also thinking about the Welsh Paralympian Olivia Breen. She made headlines when the competition official told her that her briefs were too short and inappropriate. So these are not just historical questions, but really contemporary questions, but even thinking about women's swimwear through the years, a really fun sub-theme in this exhibit. Let's take a look at another one. All right, move over here. Mountaineering, I love this. Actually, Chatham used to have a day called Mountain Day. So this is a kind of an interesting pair, but how much independence should women have, right? You can see how just being outside gave some women a degree more freedom, and I want to emphasize that some. Let's think about motoring. The invention of the bicycle and the car really granted a lot more mobility and independence, especially for young people. I love the knickerbockers on the student there on the left. If you're looking at her in front of that automobile, really a great set of images. Golfing. The role of women's colleges and women's education in actually shifting attitudes and expectations around participation in sports is also an interesting thing to think about here, both as a healthy activity, but also as recreation. So we could be thinking about sports as both of these things. And those pictures, of course, are quite apart in terms of chronology. Here's tennis is a little bit closer. If we're thinking again about women's collegiate activities and shifting attitudes. I couldn't believe how many pairings I was able to find from our archives. I love this one. This one's almost 150 years apart or 130 years apart. But thinking about whose clothing gets preserved, right? As I thought about this beautiful piece from the 1820s, the things that usually wind up in our museums are the things that belong to wealthier individuals, right? So we don't get a lot of everyday wear from working class or poor women. So some questions here about the kinds of pieces that get preserved, I think, particularly for women's history, winds up to be really important kinds of questions. You know, what's in our archives? All right, I had to include this picture. This is actually the women's field hockey team from 1928, and Rachel Carson, our most famous alum, was on the field hockey team. So I just had to point her out. She's in the top row, second from right there, if you're looking for her. But some interesting outfits for playing these field sports, right? Fencing. This has got to be one of my absolute favorite images from the Chatham archives, and a very close pairing actually to the piece from the exhibit in terms of chronology. And I'm thinking here about questions about women's agency, and I would love to come back and talk about this some more. But you know, to what extent did women push for the changes to fashion to accommodate their changing needs, their desires for mobility, for freedom of movement, their ability to participate in athletics? You know, clothing's not just something that happens, right? It represents culture. And it's also a way that we literally perform our gender. This is the Judith Butler, you know, theory here of gender, but that we perform our gender, and clothing is such an important way that we do that. And let me just give you two more images here. The basketball team, gotta love this one. So I also want to point out that one of the big silences in this exhibit really is around race. So also some questions here about whose bodies are allowed to have rest, whose bodies are allowed to have recreation, whose bodies are allowed to have fun, and who's expected to perform labor or work, right? And who don't get to participate in these activities. Who's allowed to join a sports team or receive athletic training. So the photos that I've just been showing you really do show the history of racial segregation and racial exclusion within sports, and obviously within society at large. And again, to give a good current example from sports fashion, right? Just thinking about this past summer that the International Swimming Federation refused to approve the caps designed for swimmers with natural black hair. So again, ongoing questions around fashion, sports, and these questions are old questions and contemporary questions. And let me leave you with one last image and maybe a couple of observations. This is actually not an image from the Chatham archives, but I was thinking about basketball in that very last frame there. And I just wanted to tell you quickly, the pair here around cheerleading uniforms, that's actually a photograph of my grandmother, Gert Geisler, who was a basketball star on her basketball team in the 1920s. she played for a small town just north of here, up the Allegheny River, as we say, in Harbrack Union High School. Well, the girls team was winning all of the matches and they were about to be the state champions. And the principal did not want the girls to be better than the boys. So they canceled girls basketball. And all of the girls who played on the basketball team had to become cheerleaders instead. So my grandmother was very upset. She loved playing basketball, but she had to finish her time in high school as a cheerleader. These are very working class and poor women, but I thought the pairing of the uniforms here was interesting, and also just thinking about sports and the struggle for women's rights, right? So I think that's something that we'll continue to talk about here this evening. All right, I'm going to leave you there with all of those questions posed to you. And let's see if I can get us back. There we go. You help me out. And I turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Jessie. I think it's so important to always have a historian on a panel like this. It was so interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we have fashion designer Kiya Tomlin. Kiya.
Hello, and thank you for having me. This exhibit was right up my alley, so I'm excited to be on the panel. Thank you. So yes, I am a women's wear designer with a lifelong love of custom design and really fitting the bodies that stray from the measurements of the typical fit models. That's where my passion has always been. In 2014, I transitioned from being a custom designer to designing for those bodies into a ready-to-wear collection. That's where the apparel is based on comfort. It fuses fashion with comfort, like high style. Well, I like to think high fashion style with the comfort of athleisure. I'm coining the term life leisure because my brand goes beyond just fashionable yoga wear that you could also, sit at your Starbucks in and run errands. Whereas I'm designing that level of comfort that we can take into the rest of your life, whether it's work, whether it's cocktails in the evening. That's what I designed for. The secondary focus of my line is that because of my love of custom design, just catering to the variety of body types and normalizing this variety through thoughtful design and non-binding construction. So this exhibit was very personal to me as first as a designer, secondly as a woman, and third as a former collegiate athlete. I love seeing the progression of the women's fashions in sport and leisure, and it brought home a lot of the kind of thoughts that I, rely on as I develop my brand. So there were, to me, like the things that stood out were, and Jessie touched on this, first thing I noticed was the socioeconomic status of these people and associated with leisure and recreation. I then kept reminding myself that if we were to do a fashion exhibit now, most likely we're not going to be showing clothes from Target and Walmart. We're going to be showing, the couture level clothing. So I imagine, I was hoping that these, at least some of this leisure time was also available for people not of this socioeconomic status that the clothing appeared to be. And the reason I guess categorize them as that status is just looking at the construction. As someone that's very knowledgeable and familiar with construction, the detail and the high level of construction that goes into this were put into these garments. You just knew that they were a really high caliber of clothing, which then also led me to thinking about fast fashion and how where we are today versus how clothing was made and used and purchased and worn throughout history. And was even on one of the placards, it mentioned something about custom clothing and the fit of custom clothing versus what you would purchase at the department store was more, was roomier to be suitable for, I guess, different body types. And I just thought of where we are today in that, like back then when everyone kind of sewed, I always tell people this, that you had your clothing made for you, so it fit. But then when you started getting clothing from the department stores were more like I like to describe them as like a shake and bake. Like it's not the whole, you're not making it from scratch, but at the same time, you still need you need to add a few ingredients into it to make it, to personalize it. And I think we've gotten away from that to where not only do people not sew anymore, but to where people think that if I buy this off the rack, it is supposed to fit me. And if it does not fit me, something is wrong with that brand. As opposed to, we do the best we can to get in the ballpark, and then, you got to nip and tuck to customize it to fit you. So that's one of the other things that I, saw as the progression of where we are today in terms of how we utilize our clothing and preserve it and keep it. And another thing was looking at and Jessie touched on this too, the gender inequality of it. Like it made me think like, wow, women were doing these things for so long, centuries, yet we're still here. I'm currently on a panel on a board for my alma mater, William and Mary. And we noticed this, through COVID, a lot of schools cutting collegiate sports. So which sports are prioritized? Where does the funding go? And it just looking at the exhibit made me just realize what a long haul gender equity in sports continues to be. And then the last thing I noticed, because I believe the exhibit stopped primarily maybe in the 40s, I'm guessing. There might have been something a little bit more current, but it stopped before the advent of spandex. So I'd be interested to see, like, I think there's another room that shows from when spandex is introduced to how things changed. And also not a lot of knits fabrics too. So I would imagine from where the exhibit left off, it probably went to knits, which gave a greater ability to move, and then to spandex to where we are today. So yeah, it was a great exhibit. I thoroughly loved it. I had to refrain from touching things. That's what I really wanted to do. So I'll give it back to you, Demeatria.
Thank you so much, Kiya. Those were some great points. And I agree, the construction, the craftsmanship of those garments in the exhibition, they're just exquisite. And it's just really interesting, the evolution and the progression of it. Very, very interesting. So next we have, last but definitely not least, and here is the amazing book. I love your book. Congratulations, Jaime. We have Jaime Schultz. Jaime.
It happens all the time. I always forget to unmute myself. Thank you so much. It was just a pleasure to be on this wonderful panel. Yeah, Kiya, it's so nice to have a perspective from somebody that knows about construction and those kinds of things. And I really like the term life leisure. I think that's very smart. Jessie, what a neat idea to take images from Chatham and juxtapose it with the museum. It's really smart. I'm going to repeat some of the things that you said, and I'm sorry. You said it much better. I apologize, but I think we're onto a theme here. Yeah. All right, so I am a sport historian, and I'd like to talk briefly about how fashion restricted women's movement and access to sport, and how sport helped to free women from restrictive fashions, and also some of the persistent sartorial problems that sportswomen continue to face. And we can start with the bicycle craze. Lisa, do you have the images? As Lisa is getting those, I sent her some images. If it doesn't work, I can call them up myself. You're muted, Lisa.
Lisa? Oh, no, she doesn't.
Okay, I've got it on my computer as well, if that's okay. Do you want me to switch over? All right.
Great.
And I will try to share my screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Lisa, I'm not able to share my screen. You can hear me, right? You can hear that I can't share my screen.
Yes, I believe.
I can't tell if Lisa can hear me.
Lisa, can you hear us? No.
This
Hi
is not
everyone,
good.
it's Amanda. You can probably hear me. I don't know why you can't screen share. I'm working on it, Jamie. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
And
yeah.
I don't know why Lisa can't hear. Hang on one second. This is a weird Zoom glitch that we have not had, and I am a disembodied voice. I apologize. Hang on one second.
No worries at all.
How bizarre.
Right.
I'm trying to, oh, okay, co-host for Jamie. Here we go.
All right, should I try again?
Yes, please.
All right.
Thank you, Amanda.
I'm
Sure.
sorry for all the struggles, everybody. This Zoom
No.
thing is for the birds sometimes.
No worries.
All right, can you see that?
Yes, it's working.
Should be some women in bicycle costumes, correct? All right.
Perfect.
So, all right, so we can start with the bicycle craze of the 1890s when bikes were mass produced and widely available. Men and women went wild for this new form of transportation, but there were also worries about what cycling might do to women's health and safety, as well as to their sense of their place in the world. Now, in this regard, women's cycling costumes caused a great deal of controversy. While long divided skirts and innovative designs continued to keep women's legs and ankles hidden from public view, a rational dress movement grew to introduce a new sense of practicality and to encourage women's mobility. It also provoked serious animosity due to its association with the radical new woman. Both Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are credited with declaring that woman is riding to suffrage on a bicycle, a line that was printed and reprinted in newspapers at the turn of the century. Perhaps the most controversial fashion trend of the time, and it's pictured in the middle there, was the adoption of bloomers, or baggy divided skirts, named in honor of the suffragist Amelia Bloomer. As women pushed the boundaries of acceptable fashion, they inspired both praise and derision, which has been a constant theme in the history of sportswomen. The same restrictive clothing of the Victorian era constrained women's movement in tennis, one of the few acceptable sports available to them, primarily due to its association with the white wealthy classes, which is a point that we've made before. Initially a social activity that required little exertion, women's tennis transitioned into a physical activity in the first decades of the 20th century. And with that transition came the incremental shortening of hemlines, of sleeve lengths, and the ditching of the heavy stockings and the corset, which for too long had poked and prodded and restricted women as they maneuvered about the court. Illustrative of this change was Frances Suzanne Langland, pictured second from the left, an icon of the 1920s who both revolutionized the way women played and what they wore. In the 1930s, players started to adopt shorts, like Helen Jacobs there, although most spectators expressed disgust with the masculine garment. And even today, tennis women who wear shorts find themselves in the minority. In the late 1940s and 1950s, Gertrude Morand scandalized the international tennis scene with her short skirts and white ruffled panties. Critics charged her with bringing a sense of vulgarity to the elitist sport, but shorter skirts were here to stay. It simultaneously sexualized women and facilitated their movement, which is yet another theme in the history of women's sports. Now, within certain parameters, tennis authorities allowed women to individually express themselves through fashion, which has meant some fascinating costumes over the years. But no tennis players have inspired more sartorial debate than Venus and Serena Williams. In an overwhelmingly white, exclusive sport, their racialized and class sense of otherness seems to fuel their detractors. Most recently, Serena wore a black form-fitting catsuit at the 2018 French Open, which she later revealed was to mitigate the blood clots she developed after giving birth to her daughter. Even so, the French Tennis Federation subsequently announced that it would introduce a dress code because, as the Federation president explained, one must respect the game and the place. as if to suggest that Williams had failed to do so. So we've made tremendous progress, but we clearly have a lot of work left to do when it comes to the ways that we think about women's bodies and the way they clad those bodies for the purpose of sport. And we need look no further than 3 examples from this past summer. And these are all the examples that Jessie, that Jessie has already mentioned. But in the first, we have Paralympic track and field world champion Olivia Breen, who tweeted that she was left, quote, speechless after an official told her that her sprint briefs were, quote, too short and inappropriate, end quote. Put differently, the official found Breen too sexy. Conversely, the European Handball Association apparently decided that the Norwegian women's beach team wasn't sexy enough. It fined them the equivalent of $1,700 US for wearing longer spandex shorts instead of the required bikini bottoms. According to the International Handball Federation regulations, male players are allowed to play in tank tops and shorts no longer than 4 inches above the knee. But women are required to wear mid-drift bearing tops and bottoms that are no wider than 4 inches on the side. There can be no other explanation for the brevity of their uniforms than the intentional sexualization of women athletes. To protest this constant and indeed dangerous sexualization, the German women's Olympic gymnastic team opted for full-body unitards rather than the traditional bikini-cut leotards. While we can and should applaud their activism, we should also wonder why a similar costume on Serena Williams proved so objectionable. And we should not lose track of the fact that we now allow women's unitards in women's gymnastics due in no small part to the efforts of women who pushed for the right to dress modestly for cultural and religious reasons. And so while women have found greater freedoms in both sport and fashion, they continue to deal with scrutiny, objectification, and control. They are at once too sexy and not sexy enough. Their efforts to fulfill their athletic potential is simultaneously encouraged and hemmed in. Sportswomen, it seems, can't win for losing, but it sure is fun to watch as they continue to transform sport, fashion, and society. Thanks.
That was wonderful. Thank you so very much, Jaime. There's so much content here that we can discuss all night long. There's a lot here. So thank you for sharing that. I would like to just share with our attendees that we will end with a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please post those to our chat and we will be sure, we'll try our best to respond and address those questions, okay? Now we want to kick it off or continue this discussion with a few questions for our panelists. Thank you all for those wonderful introductions. I really appreciate it. I have a question here for Jessie. So Jessie, what are the issues that surround the historical trajectory of women's sportswear, which you have, your intro was very informative, but your thoughts around the limitations, some of the breakthroughs, inequity, ideas. Yeah, what are your thoughts in regards to that?
Boy, that's a huge question. We could talk about that one for the rest of the night, right, Demeatria? You know, as you were asking me that, I was going back to those questions that I had posed earlier about agency, right, and women's agency, by which I mean, you know, to what extent were women the ones pushing for some of these changes over time, and how much of this was sort of culturally imposed, right? And there's a tension there, and we talk about that when we're talking about the sexualization of women's bodies and the way that culture, you know, has done that, society has done that. But I think an interesting thing that you can sort of see through some of this exhibit is the way that women themselves were pushing for some of these changes. In fact, some of my favorite pieces in this exhibit, I think, are some of the more radical women. I was really drawn to the roller skater, the aviator, right? Some of these figures, and obviously the figurehead piece, our motorcycle rider from the 50s, just these fabulous, really sort of maybe perhaps what we would call the progressive women who are sort of pushing the boundaries, right? So you can certainly imagine women wearing these things and pushing and using their agency to push back on some of these societal expectations. But in other ways, you know, there's the tension, I think, that we're also seeing the constraints. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but that's kind of what I was thinking about in this big sweep of time, right? As we're thinking about these changes over time.
Right. No, thank you. We were trying to figure out a way, how can we, there's just so much content there, the best way to narrow it down. You did a great job. So thank you very much. Next, so Jaime, you know, in our earlier discussions, we spoke a lot about vital energy theory. And so can you share some of your ideas about the, which you have in your presentation, but elaborate a little bit more about the progression of women's strength and power as it relates to this context?
You're on mute.
Mute, Jaime.
Damn it. All right, so sorry. Yeah, so I should first explain this idea of the vital energy theory, right? And it's a really classed and racialized ideology, but it was this notion that women only had a finite amount of energy. And if they were to expend it, not only in sport, but in higher education, in politics, and public life, that would sap their energy. And they needed all the energy they had to have children and to raise good children and to provide a good home. And so that was one of the things that discouraged women, but it's also a very privileged perspective, right? Who has the, you know, the privilege to say, I need to save my energy for, you know, being a good wife and mother, right? Other people are required to expend it in other ways. Yeah, that's connected to something called the frailty myth. And that's a phrase from Colette Dowling in her book of the same name. But this idea that women were inherently weak and frail and fragile. And that was another way of keeping them out of sport. Not only was it imposed on them, but women sort of internalized it and they thought, well, sport just isn't for me, right? But I think it took tremendous acts of courage for women to sort of buck convention and show that they were much stronger and much more capable than people thought they were. And so we see this, you know, in upper class sports like tennis, that, you know, one of the things that we haven't talked about is you know, industrial leagues. So if people work for a factory or a company, sometimes they would sponsor women's sports leagues. And so these were working class women that really, you know, showed some of the capabilities that women had. You know, women's involvement in sports like track and field really helped buck some of these conventions. And you know, gradually we see women's strength developing over time. Women have always been strong, right? And different women have showed different strengths at different times. What's interesting, if we think about it in connection to fashion, is that the way that fashion has been able to kind of showcase strength and muscularity and things that women are capable of. So if we talk about the progression of women's strength over time in sport, I mean, that's huge, right? We've got this huge sweep of time. You saw, you know, if anybody watched the Olympic Games the last summer, you know, the power lifters and the hammer throwers and the women that just are unapologetically strong and muscular in ways that they weren't allowed to be before. They were considered too masculine. They had questions about their sexuality, their identities. So, you know, there's that tension that Jessie talked to, and I'm sure came through when I was showing my slides and talking. There is still tension involved with strength and femininity and that kind of thing. But we've made so much progress that it's really tremendous if you look at the big sweep of time.
Right. Thank you so much. Before we go to our next question, I just want to remind everyone, I see a lot of really good questions here. So please don't forget to ask us a few questions. We would love to converse with you about this topic. Kiya, question for you. You're up next. So Kiya, what place, in your perspective, what place does fashion activism and body positivity have in the ongoing fight for women's rights and human rights?
That body positivity and activism is it's the kickoff, it's the Kickstarter, it's kind of the shock value that you know, brings people's attention to it, because it's term body positivity, it of course implies that there exists a body negativity, which unfortunately does exist. So I think it's bringing the attention to it and alerting people that this is a problem and that we need to fix it, and the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So the more shocking, the more outgoing these, I guess, movements are, the more that people will pay attention to them, and then we can move beyond that and move to a body normative phase where we just are the variety of bodies. It's no longer about positive and negative. It's just the variety is normal. It's normative. That's what everything, where everyone fits into. And I think there are a lot of things that factor into this movement and how we can make this progression. Like I mentioned, the concept of fit and how and what fits and what doesn't fit, and whose fault is it and who's to blame if it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit because something's wrong with me. It doesn't fit because something's wrong with that. I think that there are a lot of things that we can do for moving towards that body normative and out of this positive negative space. But that activism, I think, does and did need to come forth, just like in most movements. You have to have that kind of shock, bring attention, pay attention, this is a problem, and then let's find the solution.
I love it. And Kiya, you know, you're very aware and conscious of you know, diversity and when it comes to different shapes and sizes. And I see that there's a question in our chat here about the mannequins. I think it's Margie had stated that she noticed that all of the mannequins looked like they were the same size and was wondering if the clothing was tailored to fit, you know, each of the mannequins. And I wanted you to just share some of your thoughts in regards to mannequins and sizes, because I know that that was something that, you know, you were very concerned about, and you dress real women and you want the women to see reflections of themselves. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, first, I think it probably plays into what Jessie had mentioned about whose clothes are preserved. These are probably very wealthy individuals. There is a socioeconomic factor in terms of, you know, I believe in terms of body size as well. Also, it's very hard, even today, as we are moving in this body positivity realm, it is very hard to find diverse mannequins. I'm assuming the museum probably had those. So those are probably, you know, custom made or, you know, extremely high end.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the mannequins were actually built to fit the outfits.
Okay.
But to your point, and I'm glad you said what you said, even so, it still points to sort of a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the women who could fit in these outfits, which were mostly custom made, were smaller and wealthy and white, and yeah.
Yeah, so I would say when I toured the exhibit, the size of the mannequins actually did not catch my attention because I'm so used to seeing small mannequins. What catches my attention is when I go into stores and I actually see curvy mannequins, and I'm like, wow, look at these curvy mannequins. But what I did notice was the diverse features on the mannequins, whether they were, some of them were painted white, some of them were painted jet black, like porcelain white, jet black. So I didn't associate the color with the ethnicity of the mannequin, but I did notice features on the mannequins on either tone. So yeah, that was attention getting. But yeah, it's hard to find curvy mannequins.
It is. It really is. And I noticed the paper hair. It's like, oh, that's very creative. I like that. So this question I would like to open up for the panel. Anyone can answer this. So looking beyond the scope of the show, which is primarily a chronicle of the sporting narrative, as we are talking about, of white women, how can we look at this through a more intersectional lens, race, gender, class, educational opportunities, basically how different forms of discrimination can interact and overlap. And again, we have touched on this, but if we can elaborate a little bit more in this area, does anyone would like to address that?
You know, Demeatria, you were just listing a really important group of intersectional identities that I think are that we must pay attention to. And I just want to add to that list disability, right? Jaime and I both mentioned the Paralympian Olympia Breen, who had a lot of media attention over the summer, but I think disability and that intersection with sport and sporting in all of its glory is a really interesting one, because we're talking about bodies and capabilities of bodies and what's considered beautiful and appropriate. And I was so struck this summer by just the enormous amount of attention that the Paralympics received. And I was not seeing that in previous Olympics. So I thought that was a real positive step forward. And the beautiful portrayal of those athletes. So just want to add disability to that list of intersectional identities as we're thinking about this.
Thank you. That's very important. Thank you very much.
Demeatria, can I quickly just, Jessie, to follow up? I've
Yes.
also been thinking a lot about the gender binary as we talk about women's fashion, and we're looking at sort of how the Olympics went this year. And that now I don't know exactly, but I know that there was a representation in some way of some non-binary athletes, but I think I keep thinking about what that means for what they wear, because the sports are still split, right? They're split completely in a, male or female. So I don't know, just what does everyone think about that, and where is that headed even?
Right.
And it's the wedge of the culture wars right now,
Mhm.
right? As we're thinking about trans athletes, particularly trans women, and let us not forget, particularly Black trans women, some of the most discriminated against folks in our country in all kinds of ways. But this is really being used as sort of to whip up the culture war. So once again, thinking about sport and fashion and bodies and gender. And I'm sure, Jamie's a resident expert. We should let her speak to some of what's happened just this year and thinking about who's allowed to participate based on bodies and identities.
Yes. Jaime.
Oh, I don't even know where to begin with it. It's such a good question, Yeah, we had a player on the Canadian women's soccer team, Quinn, who's the first openly transgender, non-binary athlete to medal. We had a transgender woman competing in powerlifting, which again, I think Jessie is totally right. It was, all this controversy was whipped up to kind of fuel these culture wars, in the same way that we're seeing all these anti-trans bills introduced at the state level to exclude high school athletes, and particularly trans girls, from participating in girls' sport. But it does raise interesting questions about uniforms. Another thing that's been used to kind of stir up controversy is the issue of the locker room, right? We not only are the uniforms gendered, but we have a clear delineation between men and women's locker rooms, and that excludes people, right? So all these questions kind of coalesce and come together and raise some really important points. I know for high school athletes, particularly trans girls, swimsuits have been a huge issue, right? What are you allowed to wear? There's certain parameters on what's acceptable, but what you wear is going to expose things that you probably don't want exposed, right? So it's a really, I think it's maybe a good opportunity to think about how we design things to accommodate for a range of different identities and intersectional identities as well.
Right. Those are great points.
Yeah, I saw you go off mute. Did you have a follow-up comment to that?
What Jaime said about design just kind of struck a chord, because over the last few years, we have started seeing brands that are non-gendered, I guess. But we have, what caught my attention is that I don't think we ventured into the athletic realm with that. So that's an interesting progression that probably needs to happen. I also think of, watching the Olympics and the trans issue coming across. And I was thinking, like, why don't we just make the sports kind of like when you run the Boston Marathon? They don't, as far as I know, I don't think they run 2 marathons, do they, for men and women? I mean, like, they all run together, and then you say, you know, this person won. Then the first male that won is this person. The first female that won is this person. The first, you know, if you want to say first trans that won is that person, as opposed to, I don't know that there's another avenue aside from having, you know, the Paralympics and the Trans Olympics. So to me, I see a merging of it, and, you know, we're all the swimmers in the pool, and then whoever wins, then we recognize them in each of their identifiable categories. But off topic, but the athletic wear, I think that's the next progression for that type of design.
Right. So, Lisa, I think we have a couple of questions, and we are
it's almost 8
trying to
o'clock.
close. We can't, as I said, it's going to go by quickly. But we definitely, I feel like there are some questions here that we should address. Do you mind sharing?
Not at all, no. And I want to apologize to everybody. My computer totally froze. I could hear you, but I couldn't do anything on my screen. I had to like unplug it. It was crazy. So I'm sorry about about that. And Jamie, I'm sorry, I was going to share your slides. So someone has asked about the mannequins, and we talked about that. Joan made a comment that the Broderick Company was the first to produce competitive team uniforms for specifically for girls and women. And she's remembering the uniforms of the 70s and 80s. And that actually, Joan, I'm glad you said that, because it made me think of, and tell me, I know very little about this, but I'm sure you all can back me up. So there was sort of a movement at one point in, I think, like from the late 1800s into the early 1900s or 1920s, where women's colleges started to sort of prioritize physical strength and that it was good for women's bodies, and they were advocating for calisthenics. And then as you sort of dig deeper, like there were some pioneers in this, and some women and men who were sort of promoting this and giving a little more agency to women. However, I think Jamie, I think both of you said something about this, but the reason was, it was sort of like this purgatory middle of physical activity. You can't be too strenuous, because it really is best for your childbearing years and best for your fertility to be physically healthy. So there was a step up, but it was tempered, you know.
It's very interesting.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. There was another question here. I'm trying to scroll. Let's see. From Joan, Broderick Company was the first to produce.
That's the one that I just read that, I think.
Oh, you did? Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And then I think I see one from Barbara. Do you want to share that with everyone?
Where is Barbara?
Okay. Yeah.
Based on what Jamie was saying, in the late 50s in PE, I have new glasses here that aren't working. We girls only could play half-court basketball because we might injure our uteruses. So can you comment on that, Jamie?
I would love to. I don't want to take too much time, and I wish we could hear from Barbara, because it was called 6-on-6 basketball, and you played either offense or defense. So it was essentially 2 games of 3-on-3. You were limited to 2 dribbles. You weren't supposed to touch each other. You could never pass half court. So the idea was to restrict women's movement, because they didn't think they were capable of running the full court. And there's all that hoopla about women's uteri or uteruses or whatever you want to say. Yeah. So they actually played 6-on-6 girls basketball in Iowa and Oklahoma into the 1990s. Wow. So for a very long time. And so these women only learned like half a game of basketball. And one of the big things that they were complaining about is no colleges want us to play for them because we only have half of a game, right? But yeah, it's really rooted in this idea is that women are not and should not be capable of excessive strenuosity, I guess. So yeah, Barbara, I wish we could hear from you about the game.
Yeah.
Jamie, when I was showing the picture of my grandmother, who was a basketball player, she complained bitterly
Yes,
about that half court. And of course, that's what they were forced to play as well.
of course.
But she was most bitter that they canceled the season just so the boys could win, and
That's anger inducing.
shocking. Right.
But now we have what is it, half court basketball in the Olympics.
Right,
It's interesting, right?
right.
So I'm going through here. Marge, I'm interested in, Marge says, what is the disability of the Olympian? And I don't know if I'm making this up, but my read of that is putting the term disability on the Olympian, which is interesting. It's othering, right?
Yeah. I wonder if she means specifically Olivia Breen, who we've mentioned a few times.
Oh, maybe. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what she meant, but yeah, there's physical, there's visual, and there's intellectual impairment that of groups of people who compete at the Paralympics. She's got a physical impairment, and people are sorted into different sport classes based on their degree of activity limitation. It's very, very complicated, but I've talked too much.
No. Yeah, Wendy Lloyd pointed out, thank you. And it's in the chat for everyone, that there is a podcast called Dress, the History of Fashion, which is very good. But the FITM curators who put this show together were guests on one of the episodes, and Wendy, thank you, put the link in. So if you want to grab that, again, it's Dress, the History of Fashion. And then Beth here says, collegiate sports at the time were at many institutions intended for activity, but not competition. That's right. Even sports fields were sometimes designed so that you couldn't do competitions, such as 33-yard pools, so you couldn't time 25-yard splits. I don't know what that means,
Well,
but I bet someone else does.
Right. Well, as we come to a close and wrap up, I would like to ask just one last question, if that's okay, Lisa?
Yes,
Is that all right? Okay. So what do you think is important to take away from this exhibit? If we could close with your thoughts, as a visitor, I would like to encourage everyone to go out and check this out. I mean, it's just such rich history. The designs are beautiful, they're stunning, but it's just a lot of history there. But what in your opinion, your thoughts, is important to take away, is an important takeaway from this exhibit? Does anyone like to address that?
I guess I'd be happy to go first.
Thank you.
Why not? I was really left with a sense of hopefulness. And after sort of moving through the space, and I probably being a historian and seeing all of that change over time, that always makes me feel hopeful. We didn't get a chance to talk much today about Title IX and some of the other developments in women's sports. I know that there was another panel scheduled that was going to do some of that really important discussion. I hope folks get a chance to really engage with that topic. But the sweep of this history is hopeful. There has been a lot of change. The beginning of some of these pieces from the 1820s, right? Just remember how incredibly limited women's rights were, and ability to move through space and move their own bodies. So I really appreciated seeing that change over time. And then of course, women's own creativity. Again, some of these outfits are just, they're not only beautiful, they're fun.
Right. I love that hopefulness. Yes. Anyone else like to comment?
I think about the quality of the garments, and as we go in, as we start battling climate change and where that's putting us in the fashion industry, being a major offender, one of the top offenders of that it's leading us into this situation we're in, that the quality of those garments versus what we purchase and throw, wear once and throw away now,
Right.
That's to me what stood out. That those beautiful clothes that we saw, and the investment that those people put into those, and the amount of wear that hopefully they got out of them, that they're still around today and in such great shape, that I think we can all do a better job of stewarding our purchases in the mindset of climate change.
Right, right. Excellent point. Thank you. Thank you, Kiya. Jamie, any thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts, and I think, but I think, we have two things here. We've got fashion and we've got sport, and it's two
Right.
things that sometimes people don't take seriously, right?
Right.
They think of them as frivolous or diversionary or entertaining. But think about how much we can learn about women and about history and about society by thinking about them really carefully and really critically, right? Not just
Right.
the way they collide and intersect, but even on their own, they tell us so much about women's place in the world, and what sort of mobility was expected of them, and what kind of
Right.
women we're talking about. And so it's just a really good reminder that things that we don't usually take seriously are really worth our critical attention.
Yes, what a great way to wrap up our discussion. That was a great comment. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Jessie, Kiya, Jamie. Thank you to the Frick. Thank you, everyone who tuned in and was a part of our conversation this evening. We truly appreciate your support. The exhibition is on, I believe it's open until September 26th. Is that
That's
the
right.
closing date?
Yeah.
September 26th. We encourage you, please take a moment, go out, take your family, your children, just check it out, because you will not be disappointed. It's really beautiful. And it was just such an honor. I've learned so much from all of you, and thank you for this opportunity. You all were amazing. Lisa, is there anything else you would like to add?
I just echo what you said. This was really amazing. And thank you everyone for just sharing your thoughts and being vulnerable, and your depth of knowledge is so inspiring to me. Sometimes I want to stop time so that I can focus on what was just discussed. I want to go back and listen to what we said and what you all said. But this was a really wonderful way to not just highlight the exhibition, but really extend the conversation further than 1960 and beyond, which was my hope for a lot of the programs that we're doing. And thank you. Check out the work of every woman you see on this screen, because it will open you up. I promise you. And it's been a real pleasure working with each of you. Welcome to the Frick family. If you haven't been family already. And thank you everyone so much for being here with us and for spending 9 extra minutes with us. It was worth it for sure. And we hope to see you really soon, and everyone just stay safe.
Yes, yes, please stay safe out there.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you
a
everyone
wonderful
so
evening.
much.
Good night.